I never did like the sound of gravel under tires. It always reminded me of someone arriving late, or worse, someone who never meant to stay. Darren once told me that the driveway would be the first thing he'd fix when he moved in. He said it casually, in that voice he used when making promises I wasn't supposed to hold him to. That was the night he called, his words clipped and full of breath. "Mom, I owe 70 grand. If I don't pay it back in 3 weeks, they're taking the house." He didn't ask. He just let the sentence hang in the dark like something broken. I had the check signed the next morning. The savings Alan and I had built up were never meant for emergencies like that, but I told myself it was still part of the family. We used to say the house had a good soul. Alan and I laid the tiles ourselves, crooked as they were, and marked the kitchen wall with Lucas's height each spring. All I asked was to keep the deed in both our names. Darren agreed. At least I think he did. There was no paper, just a nod over the phone and the scratch of him lighting a cigarette. After they moved in, Darren called once a week, then once a month. Eventually, it was Colleen texting, "Busy weekend ahead, sorry, Mom. Kitchen's a mess right now, next time maybe. Lucas has a school trip. He won't be around." I never argued. I just waited a few more days before trying again. It was on a Thursday evening when I saw her car, the same Navy SUV they used on every vacation, parked across from Harrow's Market. In the passenger seat were trays wrapped in foil, stacked high with folded napkins. The kind of catering you don't order for a quiet night in. There was no harm in wondering, I told myself. No crime in visiting your own front porch. So I made a plan. Quietly, carefully, like folding a letter I didn't intend to send. I laid out the cardigan Alan gave me for our 30th anniversary, the one with the frayed sleeves and missing button. I filled the gas tank half full enough to get there and back. I even made a small loaf of banana bread and wrapped it in wax paper. I didn't tell June. She'd ask too many questions in that kind voice that feels more like pulling than comforting. I just said I had errands and might be late for lunch. When I turned into the old neighborhood, I noticed someone had painted the mailbox. A shiny bronze number 14 had replaced the peeling brass digits Alan had glued on himself with too much epoxy and pride. The hydrangeas were still there, though blue and full like always. That was something. I parked on the street instead of the driveway. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want the gravel to betray me. Maybe I already suspected I wasn't expected. Through the window, I could see Lucas taller now, hair longer, playing with someone in the living room. There were balloons. Red ones. A banner behind them said Happy 9th in gold letters. It wasn't Lucas's birthday. That's in March. Voices drifted out when someone opened the door to fetch a tray. I heard Colleen's laugh, high, bright, the one she used when trying to impress someone's parents. A woman I didn't recognize stepped out, holding a wine bottle, glancing past me without a flicker of recognition. I didn't knock. I stood there with the banana bread in hand, cardigan pulled close. Then I took 3 steps back and sat on the stone curb. I brushed something from my skirt, a leaf maybe, and looked at the house like it belonged to someone else. In a way it did. Darren had always been a boy of gaps. Gaps between his words, between his promises, and his actions. When he was 6, he gave me a bracelet made from paper clips, said it was silver. When he was 16, he told me he'd fix the roof after the first storm. It never got done, and I climbed up there myself with duct tape and my late husband's old boots. I remember the sky looked exactly like it does today, low, undecided. My fingers itched to pull out my phone and call him, but I didn't. I watched the front door open again. This time it was Darren. He was laughing, wearing the brown blazer Alan used to save for church. He adjusted the cuff like it had always been his. There was a ring on his finger I'd never seen, thick polished, not like the simple band we gave him when he got married in the courthouse. Alan had his old wedding ring resized once after his arthritis made it slip. He said hands change, but promises shouldn't. I pressed my thumb into the soft wax paper of the bread. It left a faint print. Nothing anyone would notice unless they were looking for it. I didn't want to knock anymore. I didn't want to make a scene or ask a question that would echo back empty. I left the bread by the mailbox. When I got back in the car, I didn't turn the radio on. I kept both hands on the wheel the way Alan always did when he was tired, but didn't want to admit it. The steering wheel felt cold, and I realized I hadn't worn gloves. I drove home slowly, taking the long route past the park where Darren used to feed the ducks. They say ducks imprint on the first thing they see. They'll follow it blindly, believe it's theirs forever. At the next red light, I reached into my coat pocket and touched the frayed edge of Alan's old handkerchief. Still folded, still carrying the faint scent of cedar from his drawer. There's a kind of silence that doesn't demand anything. It just waits. I didn't break it. I used to believe that if you showed up enough times, the door would open. That morning, I wore the soft gray blouse with the snag near the hem, the one I always ironed twice. Not because anyone would notice, but because it reminded me of being prepared. I brought a small jar of apple jam wrapped in a paper napkin, with tiny blue tulips printed along the edge. Alan bought those napkins years ago for a picnic we never had. They came in a pack of 50. I still have 12 left. The porch looked just as I remembered, or at least tried to. The brass knocker had been replaced by a digital doorbell with a camera blinking gently like an eye pretending to sleep. I pressed it once. Just once. There was movement behind the curtains. Not the kind that makes you hope, just a flicker like a shrug. Inside, music pulsed, muffled by the glass. Not radio music. Celebration music. I knew the difference. There was a high, light sound of laughter. Something clinked. Something popped. I stepped back. Not because I was afraid, but because sometimes you need distance to see clearly. From the edge of the walkway, just past the hedge, I saw through the window, not fully, just enough. The kitchen was lit bright, not with bulbs, but with people. Darren lifted a bottle tilted just so and poured into flutes lined in a neat row. Colleen stood near the island, holding a plate in one hand, a fork in the other. She wore red bold and fitted the kind of red no one wears unless they're sure they won't be forgotten. Lucas spun in a paper cone hat, chasing a balloon across the floor. Abby held her phone up, lips moving, eyes trained on the screen. A live stream, probably. I imagined the caption, "Celebrating life with my favorite people." I didn't see myself in that sentence. I didn't see myself in the room. On the counter stood a cake tall frosted, trimmed with edible gold. Beside it, trays of finger food glasses of pink, punch party napkins with cursive words I couldn't read from where I stood. But they weren't mine. They never were. A man I didn't recognize stood beside Darren. He leaned in and whispered something, and Darren laughed in that short, proud way he did when he thought he'd earned something. I don't remember hearing my name. I stepped back further onto the sidewalk. A breeze passed light but sudden, and the jam jar slipped slightly in my hand. The paper napkin loosened one corner, fluttering toward the curb. A couple approached, dressed in their Sunday best. The woman held a gift bag with a golden ribbon. Looking for someone, the man asked, polite but not curious. I turned slightly and smiled. Not fully, not warmly, just enough. I must have the wrong house. He nodded once, already forgetting me. I waited for them to go up the path before I returned to my car. The driver's seat still had the faint crease from the last time I'd sat there. I placed the jar in the cup holder and folded my hands. The skin on my knuckles looked thinner than usual. I watched them quietly, as if they belonged to someone older, someone else. Colleen once told a neighbor I liked being alone. She said it with a smile that folded the corners of her mouth, but not her eyes. I'd believed that too once that solitude was chosen. Back when Abby was little, she used to draw me with wings, paper wings. Every picture had me floating just above the ground, never touching it. I wondered if she still saw me that way, or if she'd started drawing me smaller, further away behind something. The dashboard clock ticked from 10:19 to 10:20. A minute. Just that. I didn't cry. I didn't touch the ignition. I sat letting the sun creep slowly across the windshield, turning every dust speck into gold. The old wedding ring I wore, Alan's ring, resized, for my hand felt heavier than usual. I twisted it once. I never removed it. Not even when doing dishes. Not even now. Darren had once held that ring between his thumb and forefinger when he was 10, asked why it had a dent. I told him it caught on the edge of a drawer the day he was born. He had looked so serious then. Said it made the ring better because now it had a story. I wonder if he still believes that. My phone buzzed once. A calendar alert. Nothing important. I turned it face down on the seat. There's a difference between being forgotten and being erased. One is slow and accidental. The other is deliberate, clean, with no smudge marks left behind. I thought about knocking again, not for entry, but for acknowledgement. Just a tap. Just enough to disturb the glass. Instead, I watched a child, not mine, not Lucas, run across the lawn holding a yellow balloon. It slipped from his hand and rose quick and certain into the sky. No one chased it. I didn't either. The jam would go bad by Thursday if left unrefrigerated. I didn't care. When the sun reached the rearview mirror, I adjusted it just slightly so I wouldn't have to see my own eyes. I didn't drive away right then. I waited until I couldn't hear the music anymore. There's a silence that comes after knowing. Not loud, not echoing, just still. I let it sit with me. Some things don't break all at once. They shift quietly, like hairline cracks, in porcelain, thin, patient, almost polite. After they moved back into the house, Darren said he was canceling Mrs. Ferris, the cleaning woman who came every other Tuesday. It's just not practical, he explained. We'll keep things tidy ourselves. I didn't say anything. I only nodded and later folded the cash I used to set aside for her into an envelope I never mailed. It stayed in my nightstand for months, growing soft at the corners. Colleen once leaned against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed, her voice calm, too calm. Do you need to keep so many books here? The shelves could be used for the kids' things. We're trying to make space feel fresh. The word fresh landed like the snap of plastic wrap. I told her she could do what she needed. The next day, 3 boxes labeled H's old stuff appeared in the garage. One of them had a coffee ring on the lid as if someone had rested a cup there and forgotten. They didn't ask which things I wanted to keep. At dinner that week, Abby showed everyone a sketch. She'd done a skyline in ink, full of detail and small, deliberate lines. I offered to frame it. She shrugged and said Nana Linda already did. Later, Colleen posted it online. So proud of our girl. Big thanks to Grandma Linda, always her biggest cheerleader. The captions stayed up for weeks. I checked once a day as if it might change. For Halloween, I mailed Lucas a postcard. A hand-drawn pumpkin in the corner and a riddle I thought he'd like. It came back 3 weeks later unopened. Stamped in red, returned to sender, address unknown. I had written it out carefully down to the zip. It was the address of the house Alan and I paid off in full on our 35th anniversary. I'd signed the card, Grandma H. That was the first time I noticed they never called me that anymore. Darren once handed me a stack of papers to sign. "Just insurance stuff," he muttered. "Legal things, nothing major." There were 27 pages. I read every line. Page 17 had a clause about primary residency. My name was nowhere in the section. He tapped the signature line with his pen. "It's just formalities, Mom," I signed anyway. Even when I overheard Colleen on the phone whispering, "She's still in the guest room," I let the sentence pass without reply. It had once been the master bedroom. Our bed used to face east so Alan could wake with the sun. Abby started calling me Harriet around her friends. Not rudely, not even consciously. Harriet likes chamomile. We always have a box around. I'd never liked chamomile. I drank it because they didn't buy black tea. Lucas stopped asking for bedtime stories. I stopped offering. I once found my old wool scarf in the trunk of Darren's car, under soccer cleats and a broken umbrella. I hadn't noticed it missing. It wasn't a single moment. It was small, daily redirections, a slow untying of thread, each one too minor to fight over, too constant to ignore. I remember standing in the garage one afternoon looking at the boxes again. One had a sticker peeling at the edge. Underneath, I saw Alan's handwriting faint in pencil. For Harriet, keepsakes. No one had read that before stacking a lawn chair on top of it. I sat on the cement step and ran my thumb along the edge of the box until it caught a splinter. They didn't forget to include me. They decided not to. That was the difference I had avoided naming for a long time. Not overlooked. Not neglected. Chosen out. I had kept the silence because it was cleaner than confrontation, neater than pleading. But silence isn't always mercy. Sometimes it's just what people give you when they believe you no longer matter. Alan once told me that people don't always slam doors. They just stop inviting you through them. I looked for that kind of quiet in everything. I saw it in the way Colleen moved her glass slightly to the left when I poured water. In the way Darren responded to my texts with one-word answers. In how no one looked up when I said I might take a walk. Even June stopped asking how often they called. Maybe she saw more than I let on. The hardest part was that nothing looked broken. Not from the outside. They smiled in photos, tagged me in nothing, and hosted dinners I learned about afterward. There was no scene, no words thrown across the room. Just subtraction. That Sunday, after sitting in the car and not ringing the bell, I returned to my apartment and made a pot of weak coffee. I drank it in my oldest mug, the one with the hairline crack Alan glued years ago. It still held liquid, but only if you didn't fill it all the way. From the drawer in the side cabinet, I pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of everything Darren had signed. My copies, not the ones he kept. I laid out the agreement, the one from the night he said he'd make it right. Near the bottom of page 2, a single line read, "Loan to be repaid in full within 18 months of date signed." I reached into the drawer for a pen, but paused. Then I took out a red one, Alan's old edit pen, the one he used to mark typos in crossword books. Its ink still flowed smooth, not quite crimson. I circled the sentence. Just once. Then I put the pen down, and I didn't put it back in the drawer. I never liked October. It always felt like a month pretending not to end something. The woman at the counter tapped her keyboard with painted nails red with a small chip on her index finger. She looked young but tired, the way people look when they've memorized their lines. She didn't glance up. "Still want the statements mailed to Greystone Lane, or should I update it to the current owner on file?" My mouth didn't move right away. The question had been spoken in the tone of someone checking a box, not asking something real. I nodded without answering. She took it as confirmation and moved on. Back in the car, I sat with the envelope unopened beside me, the address sticker crooked like someone had rushed. I turned the key halfway and let the engine lights flicker, but didn't start the car. The courthouse building smelled like bleach and carpet. I walked through the records office slowly, the way one walks through a childhood school building, recognizing everything but belonging nowhere. The clerk behind the glass asked for 2 forms of ID and a reason. I said, verification. He printed a copy of the deed transfer. I thanked him, even though I hadn't meant to. At the bottom of the second page, there it was, in ink, stamped dated. Sole owner, Darren Wallace, no cosigner, no shared title, no Harriet, no mother. The signature beside mine was close. Neat enough. The loop's just a little tighter than mine. The kind of forgery done by someone who wasn't trying to fool the world, just me. Next to it, a note in cursive authorization based on prior custodial deed. That meant nothing and everything. Alan had added my name after Darren moved out at 18. The change had been formal, notarized quiet. We never spoke of it as taking back the house, just restoring it. Alan said, "We bought it. He lived in it. There's a difference." I pressed the edge of the paper between 2 fingers until it curled. I don't remember the walk back to the car. That evening I called. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice didn't rise. It didn't hesitate. "The deed's already filed. It's done. No explanation. No apology." I told him I'd seen the papers. He paused only long enough for my breath to grow noticeable. "Mom, you always said people mattered more than property. Don't switch up now." I waited. "I need that money back, Darren. It was everything we saved. You promised to repay it." He chuckled once, not out loud, just under his breath. "You've got your pension, don't you? The condo. Why count dollars with your own son?" The line buzzed slightly in the silence that followed. I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't. Because I knew he was waiting for me to. Alan's voice lived only in my memory now, but in moments like that, it surfaced as clearly as if he were standing beside me. You can forgive someone and still walk away. The call ended without goodbye. That night, I opened the metal box at the back of my closet. Inside were only receipts now for dental cleanings, water bills, small things that made no dent. The passbook was gone. I'd handed it over last spring with both hands, no copy, no contract. "I trust you," I'd said. "Trust I've learned is not a ledger. It doesn't protect you. It just makes the fall quieter." The last deposit Alan made had been in July, 12 years ago. A check from a freelance job wrapped in a sticky note, "Rainy day. Let's not let it pour." It poured anyway. I didn't tell anyone. Not June, not the bank teller. Not even the woman who lived 2 doors down and always asked about my family at the mailbox. The house on Greystone wasn't just a building. It was where I grew tomatoes in coffee cans before we had a garden. It was where Alan fixed the screen door 6 times before buying a new one, swearing every time. It was where Darren skinned his knee so badly I slept beside him on the floor for 2 nights. And now my name didn't live there anymore. There are betrayals loud enough to break you. And then there are the kind that fold you inward like paper, like prayer. I didn't scream. I didn't write letters. I didn't knock on his door and ask how long he'd planned it. I stood in my kitchen, poured tea that went cold, and stared at a calendar I hadn't changed since August. There's a kind of knowing that settles into your chest like a stone. Not heavy, just unmoving. He took the house. He took the money. He kept the silence. And I let him, until now. Sometimes I think the heaviest part of growing older isn't the body, it's knowing when not to speak. I stopped calling after that last talk. There was nothing left to clarify. I started spending mornings with a cup of tea that cooled too fast, and papers that no longer needed organizing, but still asked to be held. Old insurance forms. Alan's pension, slips a note from a friend who had long since stopped writing. I wrote and rewrote the property request to the county clerk's office, folded it in thirds, and placed it in an envelope I sealed twice, as if one wasn't enough. The answering machine blinked one afternoon. I didn't rush. "Hi, Mom. We were thinking of heading up to Wild River next week. Leaves are already starting to turn. Thought you might want to join. Just a quiet trip. No apologies. Just an offer cut clean like paper from a roll." An hour later, Colleen's name lit up the screen. "Mom, I know things have been tense, but I think this could be good for us. For the kids, too. A reset." The word hung like steam from a kettle, invisible but too hot to hold. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I took out the old red tin where I kept Lucas's drawings and Abby's birthday cards. There was a crayon one from years ago. To Gran, "I love your cookies and your warm couch." The E in couch was backward. I pressed my fingers over the dented lid. "Yes," I said. "I'd love to." I baked early the next day. The smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen the way it used to during those long Novembers, when Darren still brought his homework to the table and Alan hummed hymns off key. I wrapped the scones carefully, tucking parchment between layers to keep them from sticking. I packed the soft knit scarf Abby once left in my car. She'd never asked for it back. I folded 2 extra blankets, one for each child, and rolled them tight with twine. On the morning of the trip, I wore my tan wool coat. The lining had thinned with time, and one button near the collar refused to stay closed. I pinned it shut with the brooch Alan gave me on our 20th. A tiny silver tree, nothing grand, but he'd wrapped it like it was made of diamonds. Colleen opened the car door with a rehearsed brightness. "There she is. We're almost all set." Lucas was already in the back seat. He didn't look up, just slid over enough to make room. I sat down, hands resting in my lap, careful not to wrinkle the napkin-wrapped bundle on my knees. "We brought your favorite thermos," Mom Darren said from the driver's seat. "Still got that peppermint tea you like." His voice was even. Not cold, not warm either, just even. The drive began with light chatter, Colleen pointing out roadside pumpkins, Darren mentioning gas prices. Abby had earbuds and eyes fixed on her phone. Lucas leaned against the window, occasionally pressing his fingertip to the fogged glass and drawing invisible shapes that vanished before I could guess them. "Wild River's beautiful this time of year," Colleen said, adjusting her sunglasses. "The air up there, it's like a reset button," Darren added. "We thought it'd be good, to clear the air." I nodded. Not because I believe them, but because sometimes nodding is easier than picking up a stone you've already set down. They stopped at a rest area an hour in. "Quick break," Darren said. "Stretch our legs." Everyone climbed out. I stayed a moment longer, smoothing the lap of my coat. Lucas glanced back and said, "I'll be right back, Grandma." He didn't take the hat I'd knitted him. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The parking lot grew quieter. The snack machine buzzed in the distance, refusing $1 someone had fed it. The passenger door beside me stayed closed. I opened my purse to retrieve my wallet, but the inner zipper was undone. The bank card, the emergency 20, gone. My phone, which I remembered checking that morning, no longer inside. I opened the thermos Darren had handed me. Water. Just water. Warm, but not brewed. The glove compartment held nothing but an old map and a napkin. The scent of scone, still faint in the fabric beside me, untouched. No note. No goodbye. No accident. It had been a plan. Thought through, rehearsed, executed. Not in anger, not in chaos, with structure. with calm. That was what struck me most. I sat with my hands folded around the thermos. The weight of it steadied me. Across the lot, an older woman helped her husband back into their sedan. She glanced at me briefly, then away. There was no question in her eyes. Only a nod that meant, "I see you, but I won't ask." I imagined what Darren might say if I asked him why. "You said family matters more than property, remember? Or maybe Mom. You're fine. You have your place. This is better for everyone." Or maybe he wouldn't explain at all. Just call it necessary. I looked down at the tree with its tiny branches curved like open hands. The pin had slipped loose. I refastened it slowly so it wouldn't tear the fabric. No one came back. The sun moved without pause. And still I stayed quiet, because even silence sometimes is its own boundary. I've always known silence doesn't mean safety. Sometimes it's just the absence of doors left open. The flannel blanket on my lap still smelled faintly of mothballs and cinnamon, the last thing I'd packed before stepping into Darren's SUV. I remember folding it that morning, smoothing the hem like I used to do with Darren's shirts when he was in high school before picture day. That small, useless tenderness. Colleen had picked the music, soft folk songs I didn't recognize. Abby hummed along off-key, but with a kind of effort that felt deliberate, performative even. Lucas sat beside me, earbuds in, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Not once did he look up from his phone. I'd baked a tin of oatmeal cookies and brought scarves for the kids. I'd placed them neatly in the canvas tote they gave me last Christmas, the one printed with a cheerful, "World's Best Grandma," though the ink had already faded. They'd said we were headed to Wild River for a fall weekend, a little healing, Colleen had called it. Her voice had that upward tilt at the end of every sentence that made it sound like she was suggesting something generous. "We all need a reset," she'd said, "especially you." I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask why no one mentioned it before now, or why they had suddenly remembered I existed. I just nodded and packed my blanket. Somewhere after the second gas station, I noticed Darren hadn't spoken since we'd left town. He tapped the wheel with one hand and scrolled through his GPS with the other. The only time he addressed me was to say, "You'll like it up there. No traffic, clean air." I asked once softly, "Where are we staying?" He didn't answer directly. "Don't worry, Mom. It'll be nice." We drove higher into the hills, the trees outside turning dense, a darker kind of green. The windows started to fog, and I traced a small circle in the glass with my finger. No one noticed. The rest stop came just after a sharp bend in the road. Darren pulled in smoothly, like he'd done it 100 times. It was a small place, 2 picnic tables, 1 vending machine, a single restroom made of stone and wood that looked as if it hadn't been cleaned in years. Fog sat heavy on the roof like an old thought. Colleen turned around in her seat and smiled. "Bathroom break," I nodded. My legs ached from the long ride, and I thought of stretching, maybe taking in some of that clean air Darren had promised. I stepped out slowly. The air bit through my sweater. Lucas stayed in the car. Abby followed Colleen toward the vending machine. Darren walked behind me, but didn't speak. Inside the restroom, I held onto the chipped sink for a moment longer than I needed to. There was a small mirror, scratched and cloudy. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. When I stepped outside, the lot was empty. The SUV was gone. No voices, no laughter, no humming. Just the wind and the sound of my shoes shifting against gravel. I looked toward the tree line. Nothing. At first, I thought they'd moved the car, maybe parked on the other side. I walked the perimeter once, then again. Still nothing. I checked my coat pocket. No phone. My purse gone. I called their names, each one like an old prayer whispered too many times to count. A man stepped out from behind the building. He wore a maintenance vest and held a can of soda. "You all right, ma'am?" My mouth opened, but no words came out. I nodded slowly, as if trying to convince my own neck to cooperate. He stepped closer. "You get left behind." I remember hearing my own voice then, but it sounded like someone else's. Could I borrow a phone? I called the bank first. I had memorized the number years ago in case the rotary ever stopped working. I gave my name. They told me all cards had been used, all accounts cleared. I didn't ask by whom. Then I called June. I didn't explain. I didn't have to. She answered on the second ring. "Where are you?" I looked at the signpost, half rusted, pointing west. I said only 5 words. "I've been left. On Wild River." She didn't speak after that. I could hear her breathing. I waited for her to hang up, but she didn't. I sat on a stone bench by the vending machine. I watched a bird land on the trash can, peck once and fly off. I watched the sky dim into gray. There was a time I would have cried. There was a time I would have called this a misunderstanding. There was a time I would have defended Darren to my sister, to my late husband's photograph, to myself. That time had passed. The blanket I had folded so carefully now sat on some backseat far away next to uneaten cookies and scarves that would never be worn. I took the ends of my own scarf and wrapped them tighter around my wrist, not for warmth, but to remind myself I could still hold something, even if it wasn't them, even if it was only the thread left behind. I used to believe that when someone knew your favorite kind of tea, they wouldn't leave you behind. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, no milk. Alan used to get it right, even when half asleep. I once thought knowing someone's tea was a kind of vow. The phone at the gas station was heavier than I remembered phones being, plastic that didn't warm to the hand. I read the numbers off the note I'd carried in my wallet for years, the one with June's name scribbled in ink that had faded at the edges. The wallet was gone now, but I'd rewritten her number on a gum wrapper 2 weeks ago just in case. Just in case of what I hadn't known until then. June Harper, Wayford, florist. Please. My voice came out brittle, too flat to sound urgent. When she answered, there were no questions, no blame. Just 5 words. "I'm coming. Don't go anywhere." I didn't. I sat on the wooden bench near the propane tank display. A boy sweeping inside the mart handed me a pack of saltines and a bottle of water. Tobias, his name tag said. I didn't tell him my name. It felt unnecessary. June drove 140 miles through the night. When she arrived, her hair was pulled back too tight and her shoes were mismatched. She didn't speak when she saw me, just opened the passenger door and waited. I climbed in without a word. The ride back was quiet. Her station wagon smelled like carnations and old coffee. I found myself counting the flowers printed on the cloth seat beneath me, as if they might tell me how far I was from becoming a burden. When we pulled up to my apartment building, something felt wrong. The lights in my unit were off, and the small flower pot I'd left by the door was missing. I tried my key, it wouldn't turn. The manager's voice crackled over the intercom, slow and apologetic. "Your son came last week with a moving van. He said you'd asked him to clear the unit, said you were going to assisted living. I'm sorry, Ms. Langley." I didn't respond. June backed out of the parking lot and didn't ask what I wanted to do next. She drove to her house on the edge of Wayford, a narrow home with lavender shutters and a front yard full of herbs. Inside, the air smelled like lemon oil and dry roses. She placed a folded blanket on the couch and set down a cup of weak coffee. There was no cinnamon, no sugar, just the cup, hot, waiting. In her living room, I saw the bag they'd left behind, a plastic grocery sack. Inside, a child's water bottle half empty, a pack of crackers crushed. No wallet, no pills, no house key, no phone, just the echo of their leaving. At the bottom was a folded paper towel, something tucked inside. It was a crayon drawing. Sloppy hearts, stars a stick figure lady with silver hair and a crooked smile. Underneath, written in uneven, hopeful lettering, "Love you, Grandma." It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. Lucas. I sat with the note in my lap for an hour, maybe more. The television stayed off. June moved in and out of the room without speaking. She knew how to let silence breathe. I touched the corners of the paper. They were soft worn, the kind of edges children chew on absent-mindedly. His little hands, I imagined, had folded this, carried it, maybe even offered it to me once, or meant to. When I unfolded it fully, I noticed something else, a fingerprint in jelly just beside the word love. A small thing, a true thing, but not enough to anchor me. I stood in the kitchen holding the paper over the gas flame, the edges caught fast curling inwards before crumbling into gray. I didn't flinch. I didn't blow it out. I watched the ashes fall into the sink like pepper scattered across a plate. My fingers stayed clenched long after the flame had gone. I didn't hear June come in. Her voice, when it arrived, was neutral. "That was a nice drawing." I didn't reply. My mouth wouldn't shape around any sound. She didn't push. In the quiet that followed, I traced a small burn on my thumb where the flame had kissed it. The skin was red but didn't blister. Not yet. I thought of the keys, the apartment, the forgotten bag. I thought of my name on envelopes. I thought of mail that would no longer find me. I was not where I belonged. I wasn't sure I had belonged anywhere in years. Later that night, June brought in an old photo album, one from our parents' house. She left it on the coffee table unopened. "I wasn't sure if you still had any of these." The album sat there. I didn't touch it. The truth is, I remembered every photo in it without needing to look. The scratch on Dad's Buick, the yellow curtains behind Mom in her robe, the day Alan built the swing in the backyard. I had built a life inside those frames once. Now, all I had was the silence that followed. Not grief, not memory. Something quieter. Something like absence made solid. I went back to the kitchen later, ran the faucet until the water turned cold, and let it fill the sink around the ashes. They floated, then sank. I wiped the edge of the counter clean. There was a faint brown stain from a coffee mug I hadn't touched, June's probably. I left it there, not out of carelessness, not out of memory, just to see what stayed. I never used to notice how lavender tilts toward light until I started waking up to it every morning. June cleared out the sunroom for me. A twin bed, one wool blanket, a chipped bookshelf I filled with paperbacks from the library's donation bin. No curtains, just glass panes and the slight hum of bees somewhere beyond them. I kept my slippers by the radiator and my mug on the windowsill, where the heat rose gently, and kept the tea warm longer than it had reason to. I didn't need much. The radio played soft jazz in the morning and went quiet in the afternoon. I wrote my grocery list with a stub of pencil on the back of receipts. I folded my clothes with care, even though no one opened my drawers but me. There's a way you handle fabric when you no longer expect it to be seen. One day, I opened a new bank account. I sat across from a young man who kept calling me ma'am and tried to offer me paperless statements. I declined. I wanted the physical weight of transaction slips again. A record. Proof I existed somewhere outside a family plan. Later, I dialed the number of a law office I had scribbled onto the back of a church flyer months ago. The woman on the other end spoke slowly. "I'm calling," I said, "to verify the enforceability of a hand-signed loan agreement. Personal, not commercial. I have a copy." I didn't explain more. She didn't ask. The pause between our sentences was long, but not uncomfortable. When we hung up, I slid the document back into its folder, placed it under my pillow, and slept for a full hour without stirring. At the town library, a notice caught my eye: volunteers needed for the children's reading corner. I signed up under my maiden name. I told June that evening while she was slicing squash. "That's good," she said, handing me the sharper knife. "You were always better at making things small." When I showed up for orientation, a teenager handed me a plastic badge with my name, H. Whitlow. Not Harriet Langley, not Mrs. Anything. Just a letter and a name that hadn't belonged to a wife or a mother in decades. I pinned it to my cardigan and kept my coat on for the first 2 hours. No one seemed to mind. Darren's message came while I was alphabetizing books about dragons. "Mom, where are you? We're worried. Just want to know you're okay." Colleen didn't call me. She called June. Maybe she misunderstood. You know how she gets when she feels left out. June repeated the line to me in the kitchen that night, waiting for a reaction. "I just peeled the potatoes." I didn't say anything back, she added. "You don't need to," I answered. She wasn't talking to me. Later, Abby sent a photo of me holding her at a Christmas market, her tiny red coat covered in powdered sugar. The caption read, "Miss you, Grandma." I stared at it for a while. The framing was nice. She'd blurred the background. It looked almost staged. I replied, "When you understand the difference between love and use, I'll be here. Nothing else. No scolding. No pleading. Just a closed door with the light left on outside in case someone really meant to knock." I stopped checking my phone after that. June turned off the landline ringer during dinner, and I never turned it back on. I cleaned out my inbox, unsubscribed from everything, even the grocery rewards card. I started carrying cash. People look at you differently when you pay in bills and change. It slows them down, forces them to count. One afternoon, I organized June's spice rack while she worked on a floral arrangement. "You kept the nutmeg in the front," I said, not meaning anything by it. "Old habits," she said. I didn't press. That night, I found an old brass ring in the bottom drawer of my dresser, stuck in the corner, behind an envelope of canceled stamps. The ring had no stone, just a small engraving inside, "Always, no matter what." Alan had given it to me when Darren was born. I couldn't remember the last time I wore it. I didn't put it on. I held it between my fingers until it warmed up, then placed it in the mug by the windowsill. It rested there quietly among a few paper clips and a single hairpin. The next morning, I made tea, opened the window slightly, and let the scent of crushed mint blow in from the garden. The chair creaked the same way it always had. A breeze moved the page of the book I hadn't finished. The mug, now cold, held the ring like it was meant to. June knocked softly before opening the door. "We're making cinnamon bread." "You want in?" I shook my head. "Suit yourself." She left the door ajar. I stepped outside just as the light changed. The grass was still wet. I wore thick socks and didn't mind. I carried my tea in both hands not because it was hot, but because I wanted to. At the edge of the lavender rose, I stopped. The plants were past bloom, but the color lingered in the leaves. Someone once told me lavender survives frost better than it lets on. I stood there a long time. They call it abandonment. They call it neglect. They call it betrayal. But I don't use those words. To me, it was something else entirely. A letting go. like air exhaled after holding it too long, like walking away from a mirror and not turning back to see if your reflection followed, like silence that finally sounded honest. I lifted the cup to my lips, let it rest there, and in the stillness, I whispered to no one in particular, "This isn't being left behind, it's being set down." I once believed a name could hold a place. That being written into a deed, a birthday card, a child's drawing, that it meant permanence. But ink fades, and so does intention. I didn't rush the call to the law office. The receiver had dust on it when I finally picked it up. The woman who answered spoke in clipped tones and scheduled the appointment for me without hesitation. I didn't explain why I needed the contract reviewed. She didn't ask. All I gave her was the date it was signed and the name written beside mine. The folder was thinner than I remembered. There was only one sheet with my handwriting, the rest in typed blocks. Clean, cold sentences that once sounded like safety. Loan of $85,000, it read, to be repaid in full within 18 months. I had initialed each margin back then. Darren never had. He'd only signed the last page with a felt-tip pen he'd borrowed from my purse. When the lawyer reviewed it, his eyes lingered on the final paragraph. He adjusted his glasses, tapped the edge of the paper, and said, "It's enforceable." I nodded. Not because I wanted revenge, but because something in me had stopped shrinking. He continued, "There's enough here to open a civil case. Possibly criminal if the deed transfer shows forgery." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked at the faint watermark on the page. A feather embossed in pale gray, barely visible unless tilted toward the light. "I'm not interested in watching anyone fall," I said quietly, "but I won't sit in a chair they pulled from under me." I signed the forms, not with urgency, not with spite, just a steady hand and a pen that didn't need to ask permission. Later, in a downtown office built of glass and polite walls, we met. Darren arrived first alone. No Colleen, no Abby. His collar was crisp, his posture forced. I could tell from the way his fingers tapped his phone that he expected to leave quickly. When he looked up, he offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I don't know what this is about," he said. "But if it's about the house, it's not," I interrupted. "That's already decided." He shifted in his seat. "Then what do you want?" I looked at him, not at the lines of his suit, or the way he avoided direct eye contact. I looked at the shape of his hands, the same ones I once taught to tie a shoelace. The same ones that had drawn me Mother's Day cards in second grade with crooked hearts and misspelled words. I don't want anything, I told him. Not anymore. I've spent enough time trying to hold on to things that were already slipping. He laughed short and sharp. "So why the lawsuit I'm taking back what's mine? The rest I'm leaving with you." He opened his mouth, but I was already reaching into my bag. I placed a manila envelope on the table. Inside it were the withdrawal forms, the termination of co-ownership, the voided guarantees. A key was taped to the last page, silver-worn teeth, dulled from use. "You can keep it," I said, sliding the envelope toward him. "I don't need a lock anymore. What I have now can't be taken." He didn't touch the envelope. He just sat there as if waiting for a different version of me to appear, one who would soften, retract, ask for less. "I thought you said family was more important than money." I still believe that, I said. But family doesn't forge signatures. And it doesn't strand you on a mountain without a coat. He flinched, almost imperceptibly. A blink longer than usual. A hand that stopped tapping. I stood slowly, gathering my purse. The chair let out a soft creak, like a sigh. He didn't move. "Don't worry," I added, just before I turned to leave. You won't hear from me again, but you'll hear from the court. I walked to the door without looking back. The elevator was silent, except for the faint hum of wires pulling weight. That night, I opened the drawer by my bed. Inside was a photograph folded 3 times. We'd taken it in the summer of '98. Darren was holding a plastic shovel. Colleen wore sunglasses too large for her face, and I had my arm around them both. Lucas hadn't been born yet. Abby was still an idea. I stared at the crease through my own face. It ran diagonally from temple to jaw like a scar the paper had grown over time. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. Instead, I slipped it into the lowest drawer of the oak chest, one I rarely opened. I turned the key until the latch clicked and let my hand rest there a moment longer. There was no ceremony. No music swelled in the background. Just quiet. Just the steady thrum of a decision that didn't need to be explained. People often say closure comes with confrontation. I don't agree. Mine came with a return address I no longer used, a key I no longer carried, and a name that, while still mine, no longer needed to belong to any door but my own. Some endings don't sound like doors slamming. Some just stop echoing. I used to think life came in phases: childhood, marriage, motherhood, retirement. Now I see it more like breath. Some days it rises steady, some days it catches, and some days it returns to stillness without ceremony. A letter from the court arrived last week. The envelope bore my full name, though the handwriting on the label was not mine. Inside, a folded decision: Darren was ordered to repay the full loan within 36 months. The house had been seized and scheduled for auction. The words were plain, but each line sounded like wood settling in a quiet room. Final, unsparing. I placed the papers in a folder marked Closed Matters. It was the only one in the drawer without a label from the past. I never spoke to him again. Not after the voicemail. There was a single call around noon on a Tuesday. The phone rang with a tone I no longer associated with anything urgent. I was slicing apples. The radio was playing a jazz instrumental, something with a lot of brushes on cymbals. I let it ring. Me, everything. It's falling apart. I don't know what to do. I stood there. The knife in my hand had a faint spot near the tip, a permanent stain that never quite washed out. I let the voicemail end. I didn't delete it. I didn't play it back. I heard later that Colleen took the children and moved to Florida. Something about needing a fresh start, about needing space. I suppose we all need that eventually, just not always in the way we imagine. I didn't write him back. But I did write something. One night, I opened a page in a blank notebook and wrote, "When a person builds a life out of lies, there comes a day when they sit down to dinner in a house they believe is theirs until the knock of truth comes to the door." Then I tore out the page and folded it into quarters. I slipped it into the back of a photo album I no longer open. I live now in a small town near the lake. June calls it a fresh breath, not a new chapter. I think she's right. Chapters suggest a plan, a plot. Some arc of conflict and resolution. This is quieter than that. Each morning I water the lavender. The air here smells of soil and mint. The birds come before the sun fully rises. I don't rush to greet them. My room has one window. The curtains are cotton pale blue. There's a bookshelf that leans slightly to the left, filled with borrowed titles and forgotten ones. I keep my tea in a ceramic jar with no label. The radio sits by the windowsill, and the same voice reads the weather each morning with measured indifference. I don't hang pictures, not out of pain, just preference. The walls don't need explaining, June says I should join the local community board or the quilting circle. I told her I'd think about it. I haven't. I spend a few hours each week at the town library helping shelve books in the children's section. They let me read to the younger ones when there's enough time. They don't ask about my family. I don't offer. Abby sent a birthday card, a printed one with glitter and a photograph of us from a summer I no longer recount. Inside, she wrote, "Miss you always, Grandma." I sent a reply, a hand-drawn maple leaf, and a single line beneath it. "Wishing you clarity and kindness. Harriet." I didn't write Grandma. I also bought a cardigan last week. Gray wool light at the shoulders, no buttons. Alan used to say, gray suited me best weather-colored, he called it. I remember his voice more than his words these days. I keep his ring in a drawer no longer on my hand. My fingers changed shape when the silence grew longer than the conversation. Some things belong to memory more than to body. One evening I trimmed my own hair, not much, just enough to remove what had grown in the months when I didn't feel like looking in mirrors. The woman in the reflection didn't seem older, just unburdened by needing to be recognized. Today, I made mint tea and sat by the kitchen window. The song on the radio was Moon River. The singer's voice stretched soft across each note, like she knew someone was listening who didn't want to be reminded. My book sat open, but I didn't turn the page. Outside, the lake didn't shimmer. It just held the light without decoration. There's a drawer by my bed where I keep the scarf June gave me last winter, blue plaid frayed at one end. I folded it neatly this morning and placed it back inside. Not out of ritual, just because it felt right. I don't feel alone. Not in the way people mean when they say the word with pity. Not the absence of voices or footsteps. I just don't ache to be part of anything that doesn't see me clearly. I don't need to be called mother or wife or neighbor to know that I am here. I used to carry the weight of being misunderstood, like a purse filled with old receipts, proof I once bought something, once belonged somewhere. Now I carry nothing. I don't resent the silence. I wear it like a coat that fits. They may still say I was the one who walked away. Let them. I know what it means to be left on the side of a mountain with no coat, no wallet, no name. And I know what it means to find your own way back without asking to be found. I don't measure my life by who calls or doesn't. I don't set a place at the table for what used to be. I am not waiting. I am not proving. I am living, am